Our next guest speaker built a framework back in 2022 that has since become widely popular with millions of users every month. Please put your hands together for Harrison Chase, CEO and co-founder of LangChain. Welcome, Harrison.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Harrison, it's been, 10 months since I first called you out of the blue and said, hey, what are you up to and what are you building? And then in that last 10 months, things
Seems like so long ago, right?
Yeah, I know.
So much has changed.
We were on Zoom and we were just talking about this new thing about LLM. But since then, a lot has happened. LangChain has kind of become the main framework for decision making. And of course, now people have started to talk about how do I take it to production. So tell us a little bit about, first about the adoption and the, sudden fame that you've seen along with OpenAI. How does that change for you? And what are you doing for production use cases and companies that are trying to take it into full production applications?
Yeah, absolutely. So LangChain started as a Python package almost exactly a year ago to this day, or almost exactly a year ago. It really started off of just going to a lot of meetups and events like these and talking to people about what they were doing with generative AI. And at the time, this was after Stable Diffusion, before ChatGPT, but there was people exploring more complex use cases like RAG and a lot of the things that we see today. But at the time, it was more novel and new, and people were exploring those. And so LangChain really started as a way to just abstract out some common patterns and put them into a Python package that anyone could easily pip install and use. At the moment, or at the time, it was very focused on easily letting people explore different kind of like architectures, different ways of doing things, RAG, talking to SQL databases, code generation, all of that, and kind of like along with the state of everything at the time, it was very much in its infancy, very kind of like new. Everyone was prototyping. Over the past year, we've obviously seen an incredible kind of like adoption, OpenAI leading the way, a lot of other model providers catching up as well. And kind of along with that, one of our big focus over the past few months has been kind of like aimed at productionalizing these applications, because as the models kind of get better and better, I think we're getting close to a state where it is feasible, and we do see companies running these in production for a variety of use cases. And so we've been very focused on things in addition to LangChain. We think LangChain is one of the best ways to prototype and get started, but then we also have LangSmith, which is a platform for observability and debugging, so understanding what exactly is going on in these complex applications, as well as some evaluation and testing bits. And then recently we're working on some stuff around deployment. So we launched LangServe, which is an easy way to generate a production-ready fast API server. You get async streaming batch out of the box if you just point it to like a single LangChain chain. And so really, I think it's still incredibly early on in this journey, and no one really knows what the space will look like. If we're sitting here again in a year, I'm sure it will be greatly different. But I do think we're starting to see a trend towards productionalizing some of these systems and applications, and so that's one area where we're pushing on.
Amazing. Really interesting to hear, Harrison. So you mentioned RAG use cases, retrieval augmented generation. What does that mean to you in the eyes of the CEO of LangChain, and how do you see RAG use cases continuing to evolve in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. One of the ways that we describe LangChain now is it's a framework for building context-aware reasoning applications. And so the context-aware bit is about bringing relevant context to the language model so that it can reason over it appropriately. And one of the main ways to do that is through RAG. And the reason that's so powerful is if you're just using the language model by itself, you might as well use ChatGPT or something like that. I think the real interesting and differentiated use cases and useful use cases as well come when you connect it to data that the model doesn't know about, your personal data, things like that. And so then the question becomes, how do you provide that context to the language model? And so that's kind of like what RAG means to me. Like, how do you do the retrieval and provide it to this language model in a way that it can generate a response? And so we've seen that kind of like evolve from kind of like just straight up semantic search at the start, and now we're seeing a lot of really interesting hybrid search methods. And so as I think about RAG kind of like evolving, I think it will be all about how do we get the most relevant context to the language model, and what can we add on top of semantic search, on top of keyword search? How can we combine these? Are there heuristics that we can do to do some post-processing? Like, what does that look like? And so I think it's all about making the models as context aware as possible.
So Harrison, you mentioned Langsmith, and I know you had given me access much before. Is it in GA now? Is everybody?
It's not in GA. It's still in a private beta.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the thing I love about Langsmith is it's kind of like the web developer console for LLM applications, because I can see the number of tokens, I can see the response time. Tell me a little bit more about your vision of where do you want to take this? Like, where do you see Langsmith going further, LangServe going further? And I know things are changing very quickly, but what's your vision of it, at least for the short 6 to 8 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Langsmith really started from this idea of LangChain is great for prototyping, but when you take it to production, there's some other things you want that maybe aren't even part of a framework. They're part of tools on the side. And so that kind of like set of tools is what we focused on building Langsmith into. And I think the main thing that people use it for is this debugging aspect. It's extremely helpful to kind of see what exactly is going on, the inputs and outputs to each step. We have a playground, so you can kind of jump into a particular point in time and do some point in time debugging. And so that's the main way that we see people using it for this debugging. We want to continue to build a suite of tools around productionalizing these applications. So we've added some basic support for monitoring, so you can track token usage over time and also feedback over time. We see that evaluation is really hard. So one of the main ways that people do this is they ship an app and then add a thumbs up or thumbs down button, and then they kind of track that over time. And so we want to make that well supported. On the theme of evaluation.
So, sorry, quick question on that.
Yeah.
Because that gives me the idea. So are you thinking about the thumbs up and down as a way to then fine-tune the model at some point?
So I think there's a lot of things you can do with that data. So I think most basic is just like, how is my application doing? Are people liking it or not? And are changes that I made having a positive or negative impact? So it's just getting that observability. Then I think you can use it for debugging and improving. So you can filter to data points that have a thumbs down and look at them and try to see, okay, what's going on? Is it missing context? Okay, I need to fix my context. Is the prompt bad? I need to fix my prompt. I think the next level up is you start to build a data set with those. And so this is another thing that we have in Langsmith. And so I think there's a few things you can do with data sets. First is just like regression testing. So like, how will a change to the prompt actually affect performance? There's a bunch of different models out there. If I try Anthropic versus OpenAI, what happens to my responses? And so having this data set, basically of test cases to run it against, is really valuable. After that, there's few-shot prompting. So using these examples after you've corrected them as a few-shot examples to the language model to help guide it better. We see this actually being really useful in cases like SQL generation, where there's kind of like complex queries, and if you know that a similar query has been asked before, and we have a correct kind of like SQL generation, if you can provide that as a few-shot example, we see that being really helpful. And then the final thing is fine-tuning, which you mentioned. Yeah, I think absolutely we can start to build up a data set of these points and fine-tune local models or something like that.
That's brilliant. I know you have to go present at TEDx, which is probably just across the street, so thank you for taking the time. I think Mackenzie has one more question, and then we'll let you go.
So, of course, LangChain being part of the open source community, what does that mean to you, and what challenges or opportunities do you see going forward for open source?
Yeah, I think open source is fantastic, and I think what it means to me is working with a lot of awesome people together in the open, transparently, and trying to achieve, benchmark various things. I think that's been part of the absolute pleasure of working on LangChain. Is I think we have over 1,500 contributors to the Python package, so it's been awesome to work with. A lot of them. Stan, I think, is here in the audience. Brian, we partner with them on structured. So I think, yeah, it really means being able to work openly with a large group of people. And yeah, I think going forward, there is a lot of, I think one of the amazing things about these large language models is they're so good at a variety of tasks. And I think that actually makes the open source community very good at approaching and figuring out how best to use them. Because there's so many different applications that if it was just a few people kind of like playing around with them, you might not get the same insights that you have when you have millions of people playing around with them. And then with the open source language models themselves specifically, perhaps millions of people trying to fine tune them or trying to speed them up or things like that. So yeah, I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be alive and be working in AI. I think conferences like this are awesome for bringing together a group of people, and I'm really excited about the future.
Yeah, personally for me, I think it's frightening to do pull requests in an open source project, but we did one SingleStore connector within LangChain as well. And when I go look at the comments and stuff, it's like, okay, you need to be like really, really good about what we are doing because it's visible to everybody, and it has to be production grade. But again, thank you so much, Harrison, for the partnership and for being here and for doing whatever you're doing for open source community. We all appreciate it and looking forward to working with you.
No, thank you guys. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Harrison.
All right.